I want to bring in former Manhattan prosecutor Jeremy Saland. Jeremy, good to see you here. Look, anytime a jury asks for information, prosecutors and defense want to know why. They've asked now to review bystander and police video at the heart of this case, including Penny's interview with detectives and the video that mostly shows most of the nearly 6-minute restraint. What does this tell you about their deliberations?
The jury at first wanted to know the charges, and they were going to say, well, let's bypass that and get to see whether or not these crimes were committed. But now hearing these questions, we know they're looking at two other relevant and important elements, which is the causation factor and the justification factor. Because causation, you have to get that to get to the next stage of justification. But if you think there is that, I did something wrong, you can skip to the part where you go right to the charges. So they're getting to the meat of it, which sends something to both prosecution and defense. I don't know what they're thinking. It could be one juror or it could be all of them.
And of course, unanimity is required here. And the jury also asked for part of a city medical examiner's testimony. That was the final witness for the prosecution, by the way, who concluded that the chokehold that was used by Penny was what killed Neely. Now, keep in mind, both sides called up different forensic experts during the trial, and they disagreed whether the chokehold was the cause of death or something else. Why do you think the jury wanted a refresher of that specific testimony?
That's an interesting question. And again, that's a causation issue. Was that death caused, as the ME or the medical examiner said, I don't need to know whether or not there was a drug test for fentanyl or whatever it may be in his system. I know that that compression ultimately is what killed Mr. Neely. Whereas on the other side, the defense said, well, it could have been something else. It could have been that there was K2 in his system. It could have been the mental health issues. There are many factors. So they're now going straight to this ME. And does that mean, again, is it one person who thinks that there's an issue? Or are there multiple people say, was it a direct causation because of the choking that is alleged to have occurred?
And of course, what did he know at the time? Not the sort of hindsight being 20/20. What did this defendant know and what did he actually do at the time? Look, if he is convicted, he could face up to, I think, 15 years in prison on that top charge or face no jail time at all. That's up to the judge, of course. The prosecution actually specifically brought that up in court yesterday, making note to the jurors, and the defense was all over it. How detrimental? I mean, I can't imagine as a prosecutor having raised something like that, but could the mention of a sentence during closing arguments, how could that impact the outcome of this case, if convicted or not?
I would blow a gasket on if I were the defense in this case. That is really wholly inappropriate. It's a no-fly zone. It's verboten. You can think of a lot of words, but one of the words I'm not going to use is a sentencing and anywhere at this stage in the process. That's if and only if there's a conviction. Is that something grounds to challenge it later on? I don't know, but it's certainly grounds to make a stink as a defense and say, that is not up for the jury to decide. That's not at all. Is that because that we want to try to infiltrate or penetrate that, maybe we'll call it that ethical barrier, and try to get them to think, you know what? You can still convict. If you're worried about him going to prison or jail, don't worry about that. You can still convict. And if that is why it was done, that's wholly inappropriate.
Yeah, I mean, look at that. You could look at that and say, I wanted the jurors to look as only fact finders. Your job is not to think about sentencing at all. But the wording of it and how you conveyed that is what is going to be looked at by the judge, who ultimately will decide any sentence if there's a conviction. So they're going to parse through how that was stated, whether it was inappropriate, unethical, or otherwise. But if he is convicted, and there's still an if,
right? Do
you think that Penny will get jail time?
If he's convicted of manslaughter in the second degree and this recklessness, I don't see how he doesn't get jail time. And by jail, meaning prison, whether that's 1 to 3 years, whether that's something more than that, up to 15 years, as you noted. There's a dead man. Doesn't mean that it was an intentional malicious act, but there's a dead man, and there's consequences for that. It doesn't mean that you can't stand up for people all around you, protect others when you're justified to do so, but there's a limit. And there's consequences when you breach that limit. So yes, I would expect and would not be shocked that they would ask for some sort of incarceration.
I mean, a judge in a sentence, it's also about deterrence for others, but also the penalty for the person who has committed it. And I think it's the balance that has to be struck. We'll see what happens in this case after J3 coming soon. Jeremy Saland, thank you so much.
My pleasure.